Mildred Sirls first drew breath in the crucible of the late 1920s, in the heart of the East Texas Blackland Prairie, a vast, undulating sea of dark, nutrient-rich soil that gave life to cotton while simultaneously anchoring generations in a cycle of debt and dependence. The precise date of her birth, like those of countless other black children born into the deliberate bureaucratic obscurity of the Jim Crow South, remained unrecorded in any official ledger. Yet in family memory, it was etched with the clarity of gospel truth. One of those quiet, crystalline autumn mornings when the cotton bolls finally surrendered their burden, bursting open in a sudden, miraculous snowfall of white against the endless, weary brown of the earth. She entered the world in a weathered pine cabin, 20 by 20 feet, a structure that seemed less built than weathered into existence. Its walls, made of rough-hewn boards that had never known paint, breathed with the seasons, letting in the sharp winter wind and the oppressive summer heat with equal indifference. The tin roof, patched with tar and hope, became a thunderous drum in storms, a sound that would echo in Mildred's memory as the very voice of nature's indifference. Two narrow windows, covered in cheesecloth against flies, offered slivers of a vast, demanding sky. A single wood-burning cast-iron stove served as altar. The source of heat, the engine for cooking, the fragile defense against the damp cold that seeped up from the ground. Mildred arrived as the fourth of what would become 8 children for Henry and Rosalie Sirls, their lives a living testament to the precarious calculus of black sharecropping, a delicate, often cruel algebraic equation of sweat, debt, and flickering hope that rarely balanced in their favor. Her parents were figures of monumental, quiet endurance, carved from the very landscape they worked. Henry Sirls, a man of few words but profound physical presence, worked the landlord's fields from the first hint of pearlescent dawn to the last violet trace of dusk. His year was a liturgy of labor. The spring planting, when the earth was cool and promising. The summer chopping, battling weeds and insects under a hammered brass sun. The autumn picking, a back-breaking harvest that stretched for months. And the winter hauling and clearing, a season of preparation and indebtedness. His body was a living ledger of this labor, each callus an achinotation in a system where profit was always counted elsewhere, in the landlord's ledger book and the company store's inflated prices. Rosalie Sirls was the fortress, the strategist, the sustainer. While Henry contended with the fields, she managed the complex domestic economy of survival. Her domain was the cabin and its immediate surroundings. The endless cascade of children to feed, clothe, and tend. The mountains of laundry boiled in a massive cast-iron pot over an open fire. The lye soap stinging her hands. The cooking of cornmeal mush, turnip greens from the garden, and the rare, treasured bit of fatback or salt pork that flavored the pot. Yet her labor extended beyond the home. She sought out day work from white families in the nearby town, washing, cleaning, cooking for parties, any paid labor she could secure to supplement the perpetual deficit. The Great Depression, which gripped the nation in an economic fist, was for the Sirls family merely a deepening of a long familiar shadow. But before we continue, I want to extend a very special invitation to you: subscribe the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories, and comment down below which city you are watching us from right now. Let's continue. What white America experienced as sudden catastrophe, they knew as the intensification of a permanent condition. Survival became an even more desperate daily equation, with hunger a tangible, gnawing presence, especially in the lean winter months when the garden yielded little, and credit at the company store, that institution of economic bondage, ran dry. Then came the rupture. The searing, formative catastrophe that would fracture Mildred's childhood and forever define her understanding of desperation, shame, and the brutal choices poverty forces upon the human spirit. The exact year blurred in memory, but the event remained scorched into family narrative. It was a year of particularly poor yield, a year when the rains came too late or the boll weevils too early. The specter of his children's hunger, their thin limbs and watchful eyes, drove Henry Sirls to a moment of profound, hopeless rebellion. In an act of theft that was also a claim of ownership over the fruit of his own labor, he took a portion of cotton from the landlord's field, intending to sell it secretly for the cash that could buy flour, shoes, medicine. But in the tight-knit, watchful world of the sharecropping settlement, secrets were fragile. When suspicion arose, a casual remark from the landlord, a sideways glance from the field manager, panic, raw and suffocating, consumed Henry. Fear of arrest, of the chain gang, of the absolute annihilation of his family's precarious existence, overrode all reason. In a catastrophic, misguided attempt to destroy evidence and redirect suspicion, he set fire to his own home. The blaze, fed by pine-dry walls, tinder-dry cotton batting in the mattresses, and a lifetime of scant, hard-won possessions, became an uncontrollable fury. It devoured everything: the patched dresses and overalls, the handmade furniture, the chipped dishes, the family Bible, the children's corncob dolls. Neighbors, their own faces masks of horror, pulled the soot-stained, coughing children from the smoke and embers. Nothing remained but a smoldering rectangle of ash, the smell of despair, and a debt now magnified exponentially, for the lost crop, for the destroyed property, their own home, for their very future. Henry, shattered by shame, guilt, and the terror of the sheriff's inevitable arrival, vanished into the Texas night. He became a ghost, a whispered about absence, leaving Rosalie alone at the epicenter of ruin with 8 children under 12, the youngest still a toddler. The land stretched empty and accusing around them. What Rosalie Sirls did in the aftermath was an act of staggering, almost mythic resilience. She did not collapse. She gathered her children, their faces streaked with tears and ash, and began to negotiate. She faced the landlord, not with bowed head, but with the stark currency of her remaining labor and that of her children. She secured a new, marginally less dilapidated cabin on a different, less fertile plot. She marshaled her family into a silent, determined phalanx of survival. Mildred, even as a young girl, learned from her mother that survival was not a passive state of endurance, but an active, creative, relentless verb. Rosalie taught her daughters to sew a stitch so fine it could mend not just fabric but dignity, to cook a meal from near nothing that could nourish both body and spirit, to scrub a floor until it shone, claiming a territory of order amidst chaos, to preserve food and hope for the winter. These were not merely domestic skills. They were the foundational tools of sovereignty in a world engineered for their subjugation. Yet, childhood possesses a relentless, insurgent will of its own. In the margins of this unremitting labor, Mildred and her siblings carved out a sovereign nation of imagination. Dolls were not bought but fashioned from corncobs, with faces drawn in charcoal and dresses of colorful scrap cloth. Forts and secret kingdoms rose from fallen branches and piles of cotton stalks. The muddy creek, after a rare rain, became a glorious swimming hole, its cool water a baptism from the dust that coated their skin and souls. Evenings, after the sun bled out behind the pine trees, were for games of hide-and-seek in the gathering violet dark, the laughter a defiant sound against the quiet of exhaustion. And there were stories. Mildred discovered her innate power as a weaver of narratives here, spinning tales from the patterns of clouds or the rustling of leaves, or dramatically retelling the fiery parables of Daniel in the lion's den, or Moses parting the Red Sea from Sunday's sermon. Her voice, even then, could hold her brothers and sisters in rapt silence. She was learning to command attention, to shape reality with words. The true citadel of meaning, the wellspring of this narrative power and the fortress against despair, was Mount Zion Baptist Church. Every Sunday, regardless of weariness, the Sirls family undertook the dusty pilgrimage to the small, white frame building with its gently leaning steeple, a tilt born of decades of stubborn wind, like the faith it housed. Here, the spirituals were not merely sung. They were unleashed from a deep, collective well of sorrow and hope. Go down, Moses, steal away to Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. These were not just songs but coded maps, historical records, and prayers for deliverance. Mildred, with her quick mind and attentive heart, understood the dual lexicon. She felt the yearning for the biblical Pharaoh's defeat merge with the unspoken yearning for the landlord's power to break. The preacher, Reverend Jacobs, spoke of a God who saw the forgotten, who heard the cry of the oppressed in Egypt and in East Texas. Mildred clutched those words to her chest. They were lifelines thrown across centuries, connecting her struggle to a sacred history of liberation. Her other, more tangible lifeline was formal education. The segregated schoolhouse for Black children was a 4-mile walk from their cabin, a one-room temple of worn books, cracked slate boards, and a single, profoundly dedicated teacher, Miss Ira Henry. That daily walk, often undertaken in cardboard-patched shoes or barefoot over frost-hardened ruts that split her skin, was not a chore but a pilgrimage. Miss Henry, a graduate of a colored normal school, possessed a serene dignity and an unwavering belief in the transformative power of knowledge. She saw in Mildred Sirls not a poor sharecropper's daughter, but a mind of incandescent hunger and rare acuity. High school meant a logistical and emotional leap. To attend Shiloh High, the nearest segregated high school for Black students 12 miles distant, she had to leave home. She boarded during the week with a distant, kind but stern aunt, returning to the farm only on weekends, her absence a quiet ache in the family rhythm. Shiloh High was a study in systemic neglect. The building leaked, the desks were scarred and wobbly, the textbooks, hand-me-downs from the white school, dated from the 1920s and often missing pages. Yet, within those walls, a cadre of devoted teachers, themselves products of HBCUs, waged a quiet war against imposed ignorance. They pushed excellence as an act of resistance. Mildred thrived in this atmosphere. She devoured English literature, debated historical causation, wrote keen-eyed editorials for the school's Mincegraft paper, and organized after-school reading circles where Langston Hughes and Paul Laurence Dunbar were passed around like contraband. In her junior year, she led a polite but firm campaign to get the broken windows repaired, organizing students to gather signatures and present a case to the school board. A small, practical victory that taught her the nascent power of collective, respectful agitation. Her senior year culminated in a hard-won triumph. Through sheer, unrelenting brilliance, Mildred earned the title of valedictorian for the class of 1944. Her graduation speech, delivered in a carefully altered dress borrowed from a neighbor, was a masterpiece of poised ambition. She spoke of bridges yet to be built, paths yet to be walked by our feet and our children's feet, and dreams that wait, not in the stars but in our own determined hands. Parents wept, Teachers nodded with fierce pride. And her mother, Rosa Lee, sat in the front row, her work-worn hands clasped so tightly the knuckles shone white, her face a landscape of struggle and transcendent hope. The graduation photograph shows Mildred standing tall and straight, her eyes holding a light that seems to emanate from within, her diploma clutched not like a piece of paper, but like a shield and a standard. College was a dream that hovered on the horizon of impossibility, a shimmering mirage beyond the cotton rows. Yet Mildred, fortified by her mother's example and her own forged will, willed it into being. Through the intervention of a pastor who knew of her intellect, she secured a work-study scholarship to Jarvis Christian College, a historically black institution in Hawkins, Texas, affiliated with the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. In the fall of 1946, she arrived on campus with a single cardboard suitcase. Its contents were meager but potent: 2 homemade dresses, a spare pair of shoes, her well-worn Bible, 3 empty notebooks, and the thick hand-copied anthology of poems she had compiled over the years, her personal canon. Graduation in the early 1950s brought the bittersweet mantle of achievement and the weight of uncertainty. She returned briefly to East Texas to teach in the very kind of segregated rural school she had attended. Facing overcrowded classrooms, crumbling infrastructure, textbooks that depicted a world where Black people had no history, and a society that valued her students' minds so little, her frustration crystallized into a new resolve. She needed more powerful tools, advanced degrees that would grant her the authority to not just teach within the system, but to analyze and challenge the system itself. This resolve led her north, first to Butler University in Indianapolis for a Master of Arts in Religion. Here, her study deepened into the social gospel movement, the ethics of Reinhold Niebuhr, and the theological underpinnings of community leadership. She began to articulate a philosophy that married spiritual conviction with social action. But she yearned for a more practical discipline. This drew her to Indiana University for a second master's, this time in social work. This program was a revelation. It provided a scientific framework for understanding the human condition she knew so intimately. Casework theory, group dynamics, community organization, policy analysis. Her internship at a settlement house in a poor Indianapolis neighborhood was a crucible. She counseled families fractured by poverty, navigated the bewildering bureaucracy of public aid, and saw how discrimination was woven into the very fabric of housing, employment, and justice systems. Social work became her calling, the perfect fusion of head and heart, analysis and compassion. Pittsburgh, with its smoky skies and industrial might, became the next stage in the late 1950s when Mildred was admitted to the doctoral program at the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work. Here, the isolation was of a different magnitude. She was one of a tiny handful of Black students, and often the only Black woman in her advanced seminars. The microaggressions were constant. The surprised tone when she offered a sophisticated comment, the assumption she was a secretary or a janitor, the subtle and not-so-subtle doubts about her intellectual capacity expressed in faculty lounges. She met this environment not with visible anger, but with a strategy of relentless, impeccable excellence. Her coursework was flawless. Her comprehensive exam responses were cited as models. For her dissertation, she chose a topic that was both academically rigorous and deeply personal. A qualitative study on the coping mechanisms and adaptive strategies of economically stressed Black families in urban Pittsburgh. It was a work of scholarship that was also an act of testimony, dignifying the survival wisdom of her mother's generation. Her dissertation advisor, a progressive Jewish scholar who had fled Nazi Germany, became a crucial ally, providing not only academic guidance but also moral support and advocacy within a sometimes hostile department. It was in Pittsburgh's academic circles that she met Theodore Pratt, a brilliant, soft-spoken doctoral student in nuclear physics at the Carnegie Institute of Technology, now Carnegie Mellon. Their connection was immediate and profound, a meeting of peers. He admired her formidable intellect and unwavering purpose. She respected his quiet genius and his own journey from a working-class black family in Cleveland. They spoke of science and scripture, of fission and family, finding in each other a partnership of true minds. They married in a simple ceremony in 1964, a union built on mutual respect, intellectual companionship, and a shared commitment to building a legacy. The next years were a breathtaking juggling act of profound personal and professional expansion. Awadagin, pronounced Awadagin, was born in 1965, a child of curious, watchful eyes. Mena, Men-H, followed in 1967, serene and determined. Mildred balanced the demands of a newborn and a toddler with the final, intense push to complete her dissertation. She wrote late into the night after the children were asleep. Her typewriter clicks a soft counterpoint to their breathing. She defended her dissertation, Resilience in the Midst of Scarcity, a phenomenological study of adaptive kin networks in urban black families, in 1969, earning her PhD. The hood placed upon her shoulders was not just academic regalia. It was the weight of history, a garment she wore for every ancestor denied the right to read. Academic positions followed, requiring several moves as Theodore secured postdoctoral and faculty roles in physics. In 1970, the path led them to Normal, Illinois, where both were offered professorships at Illinois State University, Theodore in physics, Mildred in the School of Social Work. Here, Dr. Mildred Pratt began to build her enduring legacy. In the classroom, she was transformative. She taught courses on social welfare policy, human behavior, and community practice. Her pedagogy was a unique alchemy. She would begin a lecture on structural inequality with a vivid, novelistic description of the company store ledger, making the abstract brutally concrete. She analyzed the 1935 Social Security Act's exclusion of agricultural and domestic workers, disproportionately black, not just as a policy flaw, but as a deliberate act of racialized economic shaping that impacted her own grandmother. Students, overwhelmingly white, middle-class Midwesterners, were transported into a reality they had only read about. They left her classes not just informed but unsettled and activated, many pivoting their careers toward public interest law, community organizing, and policy advocacy. Within the university itself, she became a formidable force for institutional change. The racism she encountered was rarely overt. It was in the cooler climate of promotion committees that found her scholarship too niche, in salary increments that lagged behind those of white male colleagues, in the assumption that she should serve on every diversity committee while being excluded from key budgetary ones. She fought these battles with a strategist's mind. She documented everything. She built coalitions with other women faculty and with progressive white allies. She filed formal grievances when necessary, always armed with irrefutable data. She earned full professorship and tenure, becoming a pillar of her school and a mentor to generations of Black graduate students who saw in her a living blueprint. Her advocacy bore magnificent, tangible fruit. Recognizing the acute need among student parents, particularly single mothers, she spearheaded the campaign for a campus childcare center in the early 1970s. She organized surveys, presented demographic data, lobbied administrators, and rallied faculty and student support. The center's eventual opening was a victory she cherished, a practical intervention that echoed the communal childcare of her own childhood, now institutionalized to support academic dreams. Her most visionary contribution, however, extended beyond campus. In the mid-1970s, sensing that the stories of the first generation of Black migrants to central Illinois were slipping away unrecorded, she launched the Bloomington-Normal Black History Project. This was social work as historical preservation, as therapeutic validation, as radical truth-telling. She and teams of students fanned out across the community, conducting meticulously researched oral history interviews with nearly 100 elders. They captured the narratives of the Great Migration, why people left Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas, the terror and hope of the journey, the finding of work in the railroad, the insurance companies, or domestic service, the building of churches, social clubs, and a vibrant community in the face of Northern-style segregation. The tapes, transcripts, and photographs formed an invaluable archive. This project was an act of profound love and reclamation. It told the community, "Your story is not marginal. It is central. Your life is not a footnote. It is a text." Her worldview, already expansive, grew global through deliberate travel. A trip to Sierra Leone in the 1980s was a pilgrimage to Source, walking the Red Earth, meeting distant cousins whose features echoed her own, participating in village ceremonies. She felt a deep, vibrational connection to a heritage that slavery had tried to obliterate. In Brazil, she studied the martial art/dance of capoeira and the spiritual system of candomblé, seeing in them the brilliant, resilient syncretism of the African diaspora, parallel to the spirituals of her childhood. In Scandinavia, she examined social democratic welfare states, comparing their safety nets to America's frayed and punitive ones. Each journey informed her scholarship and teaching, allowing her to frame the Black American experience within a global context of diaspora, resistance, and adaptation. Through it all, family was her anchor and her most luminous achievement. She and Theodore created a home that was a salon of ideas, filled with books, music, and rigorous debate. She watched with awe as Awadagin's preternatural musical talent unfolded, supporting his studies even when it meant financial sacrifice. Seeing him win the prestigious Naumburg International Piano Competition in 1992, and later perform a recital in the East Room of the White House for President Clinton was a moment of surreal, poetic completion. A journey from the outhouse behind the Texas cabin to the People's House, achieved in a single generation. She swelled with pride as Mena excelled academically, earning her own JD and PhD, and becoming a national leader in higher education administration focused on equity and inclusion. "My children," Mildred often said with a contented smile, "are my best dissertation, my most cited work." Retirement in the late 1990s meant not a cessation, but a liberation of time. She wrote and published poetry, her verse a distillation of a lifetime's wisdom, clear, graceful, and powerful, meditating on Jacob's ladder, Rosa Parks's worn shoes, and the quiet grace of aging. She maintained a widely read blog, Notes from the Captain's Log, offering reflections on current events through the lens of history and ethics. She mentored emerging scholars, her advice sage and direct. Even as health challenges arose in her final decade, the slowing gait, the weary heart, her mind remained voracious and her spirit engaged. She wrote letters to her grandchildren, telling them stories of corncob dolls and Miss Ira Henry. She continued to attend campus events, a regal presence. Mildred Sirls Pratt passed peacefully on August 6, 2012, in her home, surrounded by the love she had so diligently cultivated, the books she had cherished, and the profound, echoing quiet of a life utterly spent in the service of meaning. Her daughter, Dr. Mena Pratt, performed the final act of filial and scholarly devotion, compiling Mildred's journals, letters, speeches, and poems into the award-winning volume, A Black Woman's Journey from Cotton Picking to College Professor. Lessons about race, class, and gender in America. The book is more than a memoir. It is a primary historical document, a sociological text, and a moral compass. Mildred Sirls Pratt's life constitutes a masterclass in the alchemy of the human spirit. She took the scars of the Cotton Bowl and transformed them into the graceful, assured hold of a book. She converted the weary, bloody-footed walk to school into a purposeful, unstoppable stride through the halls of academia. She transmuted the poison of racial hatred into a medicine of rigorous, unwavering advocacy. She was living proof that the captain of one's soul can, through sheer navigation of will, compassion, and intellect, steer through any storm and guide not only themselves but countless others to safer harbor. Her legacy does not reside solely in the prestigious halls she eventually entered, but in the countless paths she cleared with her own hands. It lives in the child care center that still supports student parents, in the oral history archive that gives voice to the departed, in the thousands of students who carry her lessons into their work, and in the very existence of her children and grandchildren, who walk through doors she could once only imagine. Her story is a North Star for every American who feels trapped by circumstance, a declaration that with will, wisdom, and an abiding love for one's people, no field is too vast, no road too long, and no harvest of justice beyond the reach of determined, uplifted hands.